Why narcissists discard you? Because you saw through the mask. You remember that moment. You looked into their eyes and something felt off. Your gut stirred, your soul whispered, something's not right. And that whisper, that's the beginning of your awakening, because when you finally see through the mask of a narcissist, it's not confusion, you feel its clarity, and clarity is power. They didn't leave you because you were wrong. They left you because you were right. You spotted the fraud behind the charm, the lie behind the smile, the game behind the I love you. Narcissists thrive on illusion. They build castles in the sky made of half truths, flattery, and manipulation. They pretend to be everything you ever wanted and more, but it's all smoke and mirrors, a well-rehearsed show. The moment you stop being their audience, the curtain falls. You see, their power doesn't come from who they are. It comes from who they convince you they are. So the moment you stop believing, they lose everything. It doesn't matter how much you love them, how deeply you sacrificed, how hard you tried to fix, heal, or understand. None of that matters when their mask slips and you finally see them. Not the fantasy, but the truth. That truth doesn't just set you free. It shatters their illusion, and narcissists can't survive without the illusion. So what do? They run fast, they discard, because staying with someone who sees the truth feels like death to them. But let's get real. This was never about love. It was about control. It was about being admired. It was about having someone who praised them even when they didn't deserve it. Someone who tolerated the disrespect. Someone who danced to their tune. And when you stopped dancing, when your eyes locked on to their mask and said, I see you, they panicked because now the game is up. This isn't rejection. It's escape. You didn't get discarded because you were weak. You got discarded because you woke up. You were no longer hypnotized. You stopped chasing validation and started reclaiming your identity. That made you a threat. That made you powerful, and narcissists don't want powerful partners. They want puppets. And when you cut the strings, you took back your soul. You saw behind the curtain. You saw the insecurities they tried to hide with arrogance. You saw the fear behind their rage, emptiness behind their cruelty, and most of all, you saw the lies they told themselves. That's why they ran. That's why they discarded you, not because you were too emotional, or too intense, or too much. No, it was because you had become too real, and the truth is this. They don't discard you because you were unworthy. They discard you because they fear being known. Being fully seen feels like exposure to them. You're not a safe harbor anymore. You're a mirror, and in your reflection, they can't see the perfect image they project. They see the cracks, the truth, the part of themselves they've spent a lifetime trying to bury, and that's unbearable for them. So what happens next? You sit in the silence and wonder what you did wrong. You replay every conversation, every fight, every moment you felt them slipping away. But let me tell you something. They were slipping long before you ever noticed, because the moment you saw through them, they knew the clock was ticking, and they were already preparing their escape, not because of you, but because of the threat of truth. Here's the raw reality. When you wake up in the presence of a narcissist, you don't just change the game, you end it. You take back your control. You remove their ability to define you. You pull the plug on the illusion they've worked so hard to maintain. That's not a loss, that's a victory. They discarded you because you could no longer be controlled. You stopped reacting the way they wanted. You stopped internalizing their insults. You stopped shrinking, and you started growing. And nothing terrifies a narcissist more than someone who grows beyond their grasp. They can't handle someone who evolves, so they cut you off. Maybe it was sudden. Maybe it was cruel. Maybe it left you breathless and broken, but don't confuse the method with the meaning. The method was cold, but the meaning was this. You saw through the mask and they couldn't handle it. You didn't lose a soulmate. You exposed a manipulator. You didn't lose a partner. You gained your clarity, and that clarity is the fuel for your rebirth. You are not here to be manipulated. You are not here to be lied to. You are not here to stay blind so someone else can feel superior. You are here to rise. They thought they could discard you like trash, but you're not trash. You're treasure. And now that you've seen the truth, you'll never unsee it again. That truth is your compass. That truth is your armor. That truth is your fire. You didn't get discarded because you were broken. You got discarded because you became unbreakable. Let that sink in. You woke up. You stood tall. And when their mask fell, You didn't fall with it. You stood in your truth, and that, my friend, is the beginning of a brand new life. Because you stopped being their supply, let's tell the truth today. Narcissists don't love you, they use you. They don't connect with your soul. They consume your energy, and the moment you stop being their supply, they discard you like a battery that's run dry. You were never their partner, you were their mirror, and the second that mirror stopped reflecting the image they wanted to see, they shattered it. You ever notice how when you were praising them, everything seemed perfect? When you were bending over backward, forgiving, explaining, defending, sacrificing. Oh, they were kind, charming, attentive. They gave you just enough crumbs to keep you starving for more, because your energy was fueling their ego. You were the power source they couldn't live without. But power comes at a price, and when you start to realize that, when you stop giving it blindly, they flip the script. You stopped being the cheerleader. You stopped applauding the performance. You stopped saying yes when your heart was screaming no. And that was the beginning of the end, because narcissists need one thing to survive: supply, emotional, psychological, spiritual. They drain it from you piece by piece. Your laughter becomes their music. Your tears become their trophy. Your breakdowns, their proof that they control you. But when the tears stop, when the silence sets in, they feel it. And it terrifies them. They don't want healed people. They want hurting people. People who need them, crave them, depend on them. And when you start healing, when you start detaching, when you stop needing their approval like oxygen, they panic because they know you're slipping away. You're reclaiming the very thing they tried to own. Your soul. It wasn't your fault they discarded you. It was your evolution that threatened them. You were never supposed to wake up. You were never supposed to say, "This is not love." But the second you did, the spell broke, the fog lifted, the illusion collapsed. And they couldn't stand in the rubble of your awareness, so they ran, not because you were unworthy, but because you became too powerful to use. You weren't too sensitive. You weren't too much. You were too awakened, and awakening always costs something. It costs false peace. It costs fake love. It costs the illusions we cling to when we're afraid to face the truth. But once you stop being their emotional puppet, you finally realize you were the prize the entire time. Let that sink in. You were the one holding it all together. You were the one who gave depth to shallow conversations. You were the one who forgave when it hurt. You were the one who loved without games, and when you stopped playing their game, they discarded you like you were the problem. But what they didn't realize is that your eggs, it wasn't weakness, it was awakening. You started to set standards. You started to speak up. You started to prioritize your peace. That's not being difficult. That's called self-respect. But to a narcissist, that's unacceptable. They don't want a partner who honors themselves. They want a servant, someone who stays quiet, someone who doesn't fight back, someone who stays small. You, my friend, refused to stay small any longer. So they punished you with silence, with devaluation, with cruel words, with the discard. But don't you dare confuse punishment with proof of your inadequacy. Their discard wasn't proof of your failure. It was evidence of your transformation. You stopped being who they needed you to be, compliant, confused, dependent, and that terrified them. They needed your light because they had none of their own. They needed your love because they couldn't feel it within. And when you stopped giving it freely, they ran to someone else who would, until that person also wakes up. It's a cycle, and the only way to win is to exit it. So hear me now. You were never discarded because you weren't enough. You were discarded because you stopped playing small. You started asking questions. You started showing strength. You became aware of the truth. You were the power source, not the problem. And without your power, they had no control. You gave and gave and gave, until you finally realized you were running on empty. And when you pulled the plug, when you said, "I need to heal," that was the moment you broke the cycle. That was the moment you reclaimed your power. That was the moment you became free. Let them call it what they want. Let them smear your name. Let them twist the story. It doesn't matter anymore because you know who you are. You're not broken. You were being broken down to be rebuilt stronger. You're not lost. You're finding your way back to the real you. And next time someone tries to feed on your energy, you'll recognize the signs. You'll stand firm. You'll protect your peace because you've walked through fire and come out stronger. You didn't get discarded. You got delivered out of deception, Out of bondage into freedom, into truth, into your power. Because you asked for accountability, this is the moment it shifts. This is the moment you stopped apologizing for having needs. You stopped walking on eggshells. You stopped excusing the disrespect. You did the most dangerous thing anyone can do. Around a narcissist, you asked for accountability, and let me tell you that one word, it hits them like a tidal wave, because accountability is not just about action. It's about truth, and narcissists hate the truth. See, as long as you kept the peace, as long as you kept quiet, as long as you forgave without question, they stayed comfortable. They got to live in their fantasy, where they were always right, always good, always innocent. But the second you said, let's talk about what you did, the fantasy crumbled because accountability threatens the lie. It demands honesty. It exposes patterns. It breaks the illusion that they're always the victim. Narcissists are allergic to responsibility. They'd rather rewrite history than admit they hurt you. They'd rather blame you than look in the mirror. They'd rather discard you than evolve. So when you held up that mirror and said, "This is what happened," they didn't see growth. They saw danger, because accountability to them feels like death, not physical death, ego death. They live in a false self, a carefully constructed persona built on charm, manipulation, and performance, and that persona can't handle criticism. It can't handle truth. So when you asked questions, when you brought receipts, when you expressed pain, it threatened the very foundation of their identity. And instead of facing themselves, they ran from you. They discarded you not because you were unfair, but because you were unwilling to lie to yourself. Anymore, that's the paradox. You loved them enough to want truth. You didn't want perfection. You didn't need fantasy. You wanted a real relationship, but real relationships require accountability. Real healing requires ownership. And when they refused to own anything, you had no choice but to speak up, and that act of courage became their reason for discarding you. They couldn't stand the sound of their own name connected to your pain, so they minimized it, dismissed it, blamed it on your tone, your overreaction, your sensitivity, anything to avoid responsibility, because narcissists don't do healing, they do hiding. And when you wouldn't let them hide, when you stood in your truth, they saw you as the enemy. But here's what you need to understand. You didn't ruin anything by asking for accountability. You revealed everything. You revealed how shallow their empathy was. You revealed how transactional their love was. You revealed that it was never about mutual respect. It was about control. And the second you challenged that control with truth, the discard became inevitable. You might have thought, if I just explain it better, they'll understand. You thought love could fix it. You thought time could soften it. But the more you tried, the more they pulled away, not because you were wrong, but because the truth you carried was too heavy for their ego to bear. You brought wisdom to the table, you brought healing, you brought light, but some people prefer the darkness. They prefer the comfort of denial, because when you live in denial, you never have to grow. And narcissists would rather destroy the relationship than grow. They would rather discard a good soul than face their own shadow. You were never asking for too much. You were asking for the bare minimum: honesty, integrity, accountability. And when they couldn't give that, they chose to leave, because it's easier for them to call you toxic than to admit they're the ones who poisoned the relationship. It's easier to ghost you than to say, "I failed you." It's easier to rewrite the narrative than to take responsibility. But now you see it. You see that asking for accountability didn't make you difficult. It made you powerful. It made you sovereign. It made you awake. And that awakening is what set you free. It doesn't feel like freedom at first. It feels like grief. It feels like betrayal. It feels like emptiness. But underneath all that pain is your rebirth. They discarded you, but they also freed you. They freed you from cycles of false hope, from begging for basic decency, from silencing your intuition just to keep the peace. And now you rise with clarity. You rise with boundaries. You rise with standards that are rooted in your worth, not your wounds. So don't shrink. Don't regret the moment you asked for the truth. That moment may have ended the relationship, but it started your healing. And now that you've tasted truth, you'll never settle for lies again. You'll never lower yourself to be loved. You'll never walk on eggshells just to be seen. You are not the villain in their story. You are the survivor, the truth teller, the one who stood in the fire and said, "This is what I deserve." And even though they couldn't rise with you, you rose anyway, because real love doesn't fear accountability. Real love embraces it, and now you know the difference, because they found a new source. Let's rip the mask off this lie right now. They didn't discard you because you were lacking. They discarded you because they found someone new to extract from, someone who doesn't know them like you do, someone fresh, someone unbroken, someone still willing to believe the dream, the fantasy, the charm. This is what narcissists do. They hop from supply to supply like emotional parasites, draining one soul dry and moving to the next before you even realize what hit you. You saw them light up again, didn't you? Suddenly they're posting pictures with someone else. Suddenly they're smiling, laughing, flaunting this new relationship like it's the answer to everything they never had with you. And it cuts deep, because it looks like they've changed. It looks like they're happy, but I'm here to tell you, it's an illusion, a game, a performance, the same one they played on you when they first lured you in. They're not in love, they're in control. That new supply isn't a partner, they're a pawn, a mirror, just like you once were. And the cycle will repeat. Oh yes, it will. Right now, the new person is in the idealization phase, being bombed, praised, admired, and told, "You're nothing like my ex." But we both know that's a lie dressed in charm. Give it time. The mask will slip, and the discard will come again, because narcissists aren't looking for love, they're looking for fuel. Let's be honest, when they moved on so quickly, it crushed you, it made you question your worth, it made you think, was I that easy to replace? And that's exactly what they wanted. They wanted you stuck, obsessing, wondering, doubting yourself, because even when they discard you, they want control, they want to own your emotions, they want to see you broken while they pretend to be whole. But let me make this clear, you were never the problem, you were the target. You were chosen not because you were weak, but because you were strong. You had love in your heart, compassion in your soul, and they knew they could drink from that well until it ran dry. And when it did, they ran to the next well, thinking they'd never run out. But eventually, they always do. Don't envy the new supply. Don't compare yourself. Don't wish you could be back in that fantasy, because you've already lived the movie they're watching now. And you know how it ends, with confusion, with gaslighting, with soul erosion. You've walked through the fire they haven't even smelled yet. You have wisdom now, you have power, you have the truth, and the truth is this: the discard was never about you. It was about convenience. You stopped being easy to manipulate. You started asking questions. You stopped worshiping their false self, and that made you expendable, that made you a threat. Because narcissists don't want love. They want obedience. They want worship. And when you stop kneeling, they find someone who still will. It hurts, of course it does. You gave everything. You fought for them. You believed in them. And now they act like you never existed, like you were just a chapter in their game. But here's what they'll never tell the new supply: how you saved them, how you covered for them, how you tried to heal what they kept breaking. They won't speak of your grace, your strength, your sacrifices, because it doesn't fit the narrative. They'll paint you as bitter, angry, crazy, while they smile for the camera with someone else. But don't fall for it. What you're seeing is a mask, and it's slipping faster than you think, because underneath it all, they're hollow, and eventually, the new supply will see it too. They'll feel it. Coldness, the detachment, the manipulation, and the cycle will begin again. You don't need to chase them. You don't need to compete. You won the moment you chose truth over fantasy. The moment you said, "I will no longer bleed for someone who enjoys the pain." You walked away, not because you were weak, but because you were wise, and that's something they'll never understand, because they don't evolve, they repeat. Let the new supply have the show. You've read the script. You know the ending, and now you choose a new role. One where you're not shrinking for love, one where you're not begging for validation, one where your worth is no longer defined by someone else's inability to value it. You're not jealous, you're free, you're not discarded, you're delivered, and maybe they moved on quickly, but you're moving on deeply, into healing, into clarity, into power, and nothing is more dangerous to a narcissist than someone who finally sees the game and refuses to play it anymore. So stand tall, breathe deep, and remember being replaced isn't the same as being forgotten. They'll remember you when the new supply wakes up, when the mask falls, when they need someone to run back to and find the door closed. That's when they'll feel the loss. But by then, you'll be too far gone to care. Because you saw through the mask, there comes a moment in every narcissistic relationship when the illusion starts to crack. You look into their eyes, and for the first time, you don't see love, you see calculation, you see manipulation. You see the cold machinery of control working behind the charm. And that moment, that terrifying, liberating moment, that's when you see through the mask. And once you do, you can never unsee it again. It doesn't happen all at once. It starts slowly, like a whisper in your gut. Something doesn't feel right. You start noticing inconsistencies. The lies don't line up. The apologies feel rehearsed. The affection feels conditional. And at first, you question yourself. You think, maybe I'm just overthinking. But deep down, something is shifting. Your spirit is waking up. The narcissist senses it before you even say a word. They feel your energy changing. You're not as easily impressed. You're not as quick to forgive. You're not as willing to tolerate the disrespect. And that scares them. Because the second you start seeing clearly, their power starts crumbling. Their whole game is built on deception. And your clarity is their enemy. So what do? They ramp up the charm. They love. Bomb you again. They try to pull you back into the fog. But it doesn't work the way it used to. The words sound empty now. The gifts feel like bait. You begin to realize it was never real love. It was emotional currency. They gave to get. They praised to control. They touched to manipulate. And when they realize you've caught on, when they see that look in your eyes, that knowing, they panic. Because narcissists don't care about connection, they care about control. And once you break out of the illusion, you become a liability. You become the one who sees behind the curtain. And for them, that's the beginning of the end. They discard you not because they don't love you, but because you've become immune. Your awareness is dangerous to them. You're no longer hypnotized by their charm. You're no longer apologizing for their behavior. You're asking questions they don't want to answer. You're remembering things they hoped you'd forget. You're seeing truth where they live in lies. Let me tell you what scares a narcissist more than anything. It's not confrontation. It's not anger. It's not even abandonment. What terrifies them is clarity, because clarity breaks the spell. Clarity means you don't need their approval. Clarity means you trust your own intuition. Clarity means you're no longer controlled by confusion. And for someone who thrives in chaos, that's game over. When you saw through the mask, you didn't just break their illusion. You broke their grip, and that's why they discarded you, not because you were weak, not because you were too much, but because you became a mirror they could no longer tolerate. You reflected back all the things they refused to face, their selfishness, their manipulation, their emptiness. They couldn't handle it. They couldn't stand the way you looked at them. With awareness, not awe, with calm, not chaos, with truth, not trauma. So they did the only thing their fragile ego could tolerate. They ran. They blamed. They painted you as unstable, bitter, toxic. Anything to avoid the truth you had finally awakened to. But don't let the discard fool you. It wasn't a rejection. It was a revelation. You didn't lose someone who loved you. You lost someone who only loved the version of you that didn't see them clearly. And now that you do, the relationship can no longer survive. Because love without truth is not love. It's performance. You were never crazy. You were correct. You didn't imagine the shift. You didn't overthink the patterns. You woke up to them. You stopped explaining away your instincts. You stopped silencing your intuition. You saw through the mask, and that takes a level of courage most people never find. And yes, it hurt. Yes, it shattered you. Yes, it made you question everything. But it also birthed your transformation. Because clarity doesn't just show you who they are. It shows you who you are. It shows you your strength, your resilience, your power to walk away from deception and choose healing instead. They discarded you because you stopped playing the role. You stopped dancing for their approval. You stopped feeding their ego, and when the performance ended, they lost interest. Because narcissists don't want relationships. They want roles, and when you stopped acting, the show was over. So let the mask fall, let the truth rise. Let your clarity burn away every lie they told you about your worth. Because you didn't lose them, they lost access to you, and that is a gift they will never find again. Because you became stronger than their control, there's a moment in the silent war with a narcissist when something extraordinary happens. You stop chasing. You stop justifying. You stop begging them to love you the way you deserve, and in that moment, you rise. You step out of their psychological web and reclaim something they never expected you to find, your strength. See, control is everything to a narcissist. It's the air they breathe, the food they eat, the drug they crave, and when they first met you, they sensed your light. But they also sensed your need to be seen, to be loved, to be chosen. That's what they hooked. That's where the control started. But what they didn't realize was that the very thing they tried to exploit would become the very thing that would set you free. As time went on, you stopped responding to the manipulation. You stopped reacting to the guilt trips. You began seeing the pattern. You started listening to your intuition. You grew stronger in silence, in solitude, in suffering. Every time they tried to diminish you, your spirit rose a little higher. Until one day they looked at you and realized they can't control you anymore. That realization is terrifying to them, because when you no longer bend to their moods, when you stop seeking their validation, when you don't engage in their emotional warfare, you strip them of their power, you disarm the weapon they've used against you for so long, emotional control, and when they can't control you, they don't feel secure, they feel exposed. So what do? They discard, they run, they blame, because the strength you've developed reflects their deepest fear, inadequacy. You see, narcissists pretend to be strong, but it's a mask over deep, unresolved insecurity. Your strength makes them feel small, your clarity makes them feel seen, your healing makes them feel irrelevant, and that they cannot tolerate. They didn't leave you because you were too emotional. They didn't discard you because you were too intense or too difficult. No, they left because you grew beyond their reach. You started enforcing boundaries. You started saying no. You stopped explaining your worth. You stopped allowing them to feed on your pain, and the more you healed, the less they could use against you. The strongest thing you ever did was stop participating in your own oppression. That moment when you no longer reacted to their insults, when you no longer fell apart at their silence, when you didn't chase after the love they withheld, that's when the dynamic shifted. You weren't the broken one anymore. You were becoming unbreakable, and that scared the hell out of them, because narcissists don't want equals. They want puppets. They don't want partners. They want mirrors, and when the mirror reflects strength instead of submission, independence instead of neediness, self-worth instead of shame, they break it. Not because it's flawed, but because it no longer serves their illusion. Your growth forced them to confront a reality they've been running from their entire lives, that their charm has limits, their control has an expiration date, and their power is an illusion. When faced with truth, they discard you not because you failed, but because you succeeded in ways they never could. It wasn't a breakup. It was a spiritual graduation. You ascended, you evolved. You no longer fit in the cage they designed for you, and so they had to let you go, not because they wanted to, but because they couldn't contain you. You outgrew their manipulation. You outgrew their drama. You outgrew their sickness and growth. That's the one thing they can't mimic. You stopped needing their apology. You stopped needing their presence. You stopped needing closure. And that's the final straw, because as long as you were seeking something from them, they held the cards. But the moment you looked in the mirror and said, "I am enough without them," you flipped the game board over. The discard wasn't the end. It was the beginning of your sovereignty, the beginning of your rebirth, the beginning of a life where your worth isn't negotiated, your love isn't weaponized, and your soul isn't rented out to someone who only shows up to take. You didn't just survive the narcissist. You transcended them. And here's the greatest truth of all. They didn't discard you because you were weak. They discarded you because you were no longer weak enough to be controlled. You were a wildfire they couldn't cage, a storm they couldn't calm, a soul they couldn't shame into silence. You became a force of truth, and narcissists, they can't live in truth. So now you walk forward, not wounded but wiser, not bitter but boundless, not vengeful but victorious. You've reclaimed your power, you've broken the chains, and from this day forward, you are no longer who they tried to break. You are who you chose to become. They didn't discard you. They released you into power. Now take a breath, look at your life, look at the wounds, the betrayal, the silence, the gaslighting, the emotional warfare that tore you apart, and now, look at you, you're still here, stronger, wiser, deeper, and more powerful than you've ever been. You didn't break, you broke free. The truth is, narcissists don't discard the weak. They discard the strong, the ones who saw through the lies, the ones who stopped playing the game, the ones who started loving themselves more than they feared abandonment. The discard wasn't a punishment, it was a revelation. It revealed who they are, and it revealed who you are. They discarded you because you stopped giving them what they craved: control, attention, submission, ego supply. They discarded you because you dared to want more than crumbs. You dared to call out the double standards. You dared to stand up, speak up, and rise up. And in doing so, you became dangerous to their illusion. Yes, it hurt. It felt like your soul had been ripped out. It felt like the world had ended. But what actually ended was the delusion. And in the ashes of that pain, you found something eternal. Clarity, and clarity is power. Clarity is peace. Clarity is freedom. You stopped asking, "Why don't they love me?" and started declaring, "I love myself enough to walk away." You were never too much. You were never too sensitive. You were never too emotional. You were exactly what they couldn't handle. Truth in human form. Your presence exposed their emptiness. Your strength shamed their manipulation. Your love threatened their control, and so when you stopped shrinking to make them feel big, they had to go, but they didn't win. They ran. They escaped the light because you became a mirror too bright for their lies. You became a soul too solid for their tactics. And when someone stops being able to dominate you, they don't discard you. They flee from their own reflection. Let them go. Let the discard be your deliverance. Let it be the turning point in your story. The moment you stopped surviving and started thriving. Because now you are no longer tied to their chaos. You are no longer orbiting their mood swings. You are no longer begging for scraps of love. You are no longer a prisoner. You are the liberated, and now you rise into your truth. You rise into your worth. You rise into a future where peace is not something you earn. It's something you own. They discarded you because your soul became too awakened to be controlled. So don't chase them, don't mourn them, don't wish them back, thank them, because in trying to destroy you, they set you free. You are not discarded. You are reborn. Welcome to your new life, the one where you are no longer chained to pain, but driven by power.